Hi everybody, welcome to another Chats with Chaudhry. I hope you're safe and well. It's a sunny day here in Surrey today, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Geoff Parker, who's the co-founder of Scimcon, and Dave Levy, who's the Global Director of Product Management at Scitara Corporation. And today's Chats with Chaudhry is going to be about from vision to reality, enabling true digital transformation in the lab. Now, that's quite a long-winded title, but hopefully we'll be able to tell you a bit more about digital transformation. I'll get my teeth in this morning with our lovely guest today. So, Geoff, Dave, lovely to meet you. How are you both?
Good, thank you.
Doing great, thank you.
Fantastic. And Geoff, where are you calling in from today?
I'm traveling around. I've decided to leave my home office, which I seem to have been locked into for just over a year. So I'm actually in transit at the moment.
All right. No wonder you look so fresh-faced and you're out and about today. And Dave, lovely to see you. Where are you calling in from today?
Calling in from my home office outside of Boston, Massachusetts, where the weather is also quite nice today, I must say.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, lovely to see you both. So before we start talking about digital transformation, would you mind, each of you, give me a quick overview of your respective companies and a little bit about your own background as well?
Yeah, certainly. You want me to start, Rizwan?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Geoff.
Yeah, okay. So Scimcon is an informatics consultancy. We've been helping on information system projects within life sciences companies for just over 20 years. We do that globally. And myself, I started my professional life, I guess, as a detergent chemist, did that for a while, and then through various moves, then moved into working with one of the main LIMS vendors, and that transitioned to meeting my co-founder and business partner, and we saw that there was a real gap in how services were provided, and particularly how expertise and knowledge was transferred into some of these projects. We saw a lot of the same issues in projects happening time and time again, and we believed we could help companies implement projects and manage them much better. So that's what we've been doing, and we've been doing that globally for, as I say, about 20 years.
Fantastic. And Dave, tell me a little bit about Scitara and what you do.
Sure, thanks, Rizwan. So Scitara is a young cloud-based company. We're headquartered out of Marlborough, Massachusetts, and we're focused on universal data connectivity in the lab, basically establishing independent infrastructure for multi-directional digital data within the laboratory space.
Fantastic. Okay, so my first question, sort of setting the scene, is, I mean, this is direct to you, Geoff. So what are the trends and challenges you are seeing in the informatics space at the moment?
All right, so I think there's a couple of answers to that, Rizwan. Thanks for the question. I think the first one is it's a super exciting time to be involved in informatics at the moment. There's so much changing with companies buying other companies within this, other informatics companies buying other informatics companies. Sure. There's huge investments going on by venture capitalist companies and funds into informatics, and some, quite astonishing numbers of dollars being invested. So that's all driving sort of like a lot of interest in the space, and a lot of movement and progression as well. And I think that will continue for a few years to come. So that's kind of like the background to the space itself. I think in the work that Scimcon do, I mean, we're still very much involved in single projects such as LIMS projects, ELN projects, STMS, instrument systems, environmental monitoring systems, you name it, we're still doing them. And we're still supporting those, doing services such as validation and data integrity. So it's kind of like the bigger view. But I think as far as trends are concerned, we're increasingly being asked to look at what you could call holistically at data. So traditionally, and certainly when I started in the business, what people cared about was the experiment they were doing. Yep. So I don't know, they want to find some characteristic about a compound, or they want to find out which cell line is best to produce a particular protein, or which protein, which antibody binds best to that protein. But the experiment was it. So you'd record data about what you were doing, why you were doing it. You'd record the good old samples, tests, and results that you generate, and then you'd write a report with some conclusion at the end. or maybe it's an automated certificate of analysis, but you're really only interested in that piece of work you're doing today.
Oh.
And that affects something and it moves on. But today, really what I think the trend that's happening is people are more interested. Of course, they still need to do that because they still need to get today's work done, but they're very much interested in how they can reuse that information later. And you've got the somewhat obvious picture of how can we use the results to short circuit our research or whatever it is you're doing, but research is often used as an example. So maybe we can look at compounds we've used before and predict which compound is going to be best, or which group of compounds are going to be best to use against this disease, or which type of proteins or molecules. And then you've also got sort of more granular level, which is in the lab itself. So if I'm doing an experiment to characterize a compound, and we've done something similar on a compound that's very similar, and we've done that work before, it was maybe 6 months ago, it was maybe 12 months or more ago. And unless I know that was done, or I know the scientist that does that type of work, I probably can't find that experiment very easily. And if I find the experiment, I can't go into the instrument files or the instrument settings and say, oh, I see what we did last time and what settings we applied, how long we ran the detector for, what wavelength, or what pump pressure do we use, all those kind of settings. But if you could find those quickly for something that you did similar to 6 months ago, then maybe you only need to do one instrument run, or maybe a couple of instrument runs to get the results you're after, instead of maybe 3 or 4, particularly in research where you may be doing things for the first time. Just think of how much time that could save. And not just the time saving, you could then be doing more interesting science than just kind of repeat work. So that's really what people are looking at, that sort of holistic approach to data. It's probably behind most of our projects these days.
I suppose you could somewhat say actually making that data go further as well, isn't it? It's making sure that whatever data you generate, you can use that again and again for other things down the line, rather than just that one-off hit when you've actually done the actual experiment.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And thinking at each level, what does that reuse mean? What does getting that extra mile from that data mean? And it might be something simple as, how are my instruments being used, and do I need to purchase new instruments because the utility is too high on a particular instrument, or it's too low, so we could move that instrument somewhere else. Right up to that, well, sit in front of a computer and tell me which compounds should I start with.
Fine. And you didn't mention it, but I mean, has COVID itself and the pandemic sped up the whole digitalization process for your customers, certainly? Because I mean, I know people I've spoken to in the beginning of the year saying, how's the year gone for you? What are you looking at forward? They all said to me, well, it sped up our digital program. We were thinking about it. Now we're definitely doing it, and people are working remotely. So we've had to act upon it and make sure that we've got this process in place now. And those who were prepared beforehand are in a great place. And those who weren't had to catch up, really fast to get to that point as well. So did you find that yourself, or have you found that yourself in terms of impacting the trends?
Yeah, that's interesting. When I was talking about the big change in the business with all the acquisitions and things like that, that's definitely happening at the same time as there's a huge uptake in business across all informatics product types. And I think there's a certain degree of that has come from the focus that COVID's put on doing science quickly and doing it smart. Obviously, there's some of the actual projects that people like ourselves and others are working on that are actually COVID related. But I agree that ability to have information systems that support remote working has just, it's just become super important. Before it was something that happened occasionally. Now it's something that happens every day. So the companies that do have systems are trying to make them more effective, and the ones that were unfortunate enough not to have that sort of remote working are having to move really quickly.
Right. And Dave, if we start talking about a holistic approach from a Scitara focus, what do you think about the trends, and what Geoff just said about the trends and COVID as well, and pandemic?
I think that they're interconnected, actually, Rizwan. Thanks. I think the COVID situation and the need for remote access has really exposed that some data is accessible, but a lot of it isn't. Which then raises the question, why? Why isn't it? What needs to be done to make it accessible? And so when we think about the holistic nature of data integration, to expand a little bit on what Geoff said,
Sure.
we're looking at expanding and thinking about the holistic nature of the laboratory in general, and all of the different kinds of instruments in the laboratory, and how they produce data, and making that data then accessible to all of the different resources, the other laboratory resources that are out there. So if you think a little bit historically about the way data integration has been performed, it's really been to solve very narrow, specific problems. I have my LIMS system and it wants to read data from a balance. How do I do that? Or I have an e-notebook and I want to be able to queue up an HPLC run and get the data back. Well, how do I do that? And you can build the underlying infrastructure to make that happen. There's plenty of tools out there. But if you look at the broad range of different types of interactions between different types of instruments, that holistic, if you will, connectivity doesn't exist. And it becomes very challenging to react and move to address different types of flows in the lab. And so that's one of the things that we're focused on is figuring out how do you get that done, and really to establish a true holistic data connectivity platform. You really have to abstract or decouple, if you will, the integration layer or the connectivity layer from the applications, and that layer has to kind of exist on its own, if you will, and have its own layer of a level of intelligence, so that you can really connect anything to anything. And then that continues to support the integrations that have been done so far, but also provides a lot of flexibility as far as changing workflows, changing instruments as instruments come and go in the lab. And I think finally, to Geoff's final point, the issue around, what's the mechanism by which you track the data that flows through the system? Is there a way that you can keep track of the information as it's flowing through this infrastructure, if you will? And that's what we think about it as an intelligent infrastructure for communications. Then you could go back and recover that data that Geoff was talking about, that it's there, it exists, it's a transactional record, because it happened, and you can track where the data went, how it was picked up, what happened to it, where it got dropped off, and you could potentially reconstruct it. So if it's almost as if you're decoupling the infrastructure, the connectivity infrastructure, from the applications and the instruments that are running. And we've started to hear more and more partners and companies talk about this decoupling concept, and something that we certainly support 100%. It's a big part of what we're doing.
Right, and I know obviously this is all done on the cloud. So what has been the feedback you've been getting from people with regards to using the cloud? Because I know historically Pharma's been very regulated and quite nervous about anything outside of manual or physical silos. So what's been the reaction to this from your customers and people you've been talking to about the cloud?
I would say generally very positive. I think that people are becoming more and more comfortable with cloud technology and with the underlying security models that are available to secure data. If you look at just about every company now has their own private cloud set up, and that's an environment we can certainly work in as well. The truth is that, large companies, small companies, they've been using the cloud for sensitive data, for decades, quite honestly. It just hasn't been scientific data. It's been other kinds of data. And so I think that things are catching up now and people are starting to become a little bit more comfortable with the environment.
Right, thank you. Right, so Geoff, coming back to you, what are your thoughts on this data decoupling?
Interesting. I think data decoupling, like an awful lot of things in informatics, it sounds great, and it no doubt is, but it's a little bit more complicated than that to start with. The approach, it sounds great, but you've just got to think about the practicalities. And I think one thing that companies have kind of tried to solve for a long time is global systems. Yep. So there's a lot of benefit in having, say, one global LIMS or one global ELN. You know, you get the economies of scale, you get less interfacing, which Dave's talking about, you get less training, you get less costs from system administration because it's all the same system, etc. Just basically economies of scale. And I think there is real benefit in that, but you know, in the years we've worked in the industry, we've seen very few global systems, unless you've got labs that are distributed around the world that do exactly the same job, and not only the same job, but do it in the same way. And you would be surprised how many times that doesn't match. You're going to end up with something that's less than optimal and is not going to drive success. So really what we tend to work with our customers on is an approach, and I'll come back to the data decoupling, but an approach which is select as many systems as is sensible.
Right.
So where you've got differences in your organization, particularly if those differences are key to what makes your organization, your life sciences company unique, well, you better support them. And in supporting them, that might mean you buy another system, or you work very hard on making sure that system fits, because you need to support those differences. But you don't want to do that to the extent where you've got one system for every lab, because that would clearly be chaos. So how do you solve that problem? How do you make that work? Well, as is often the case in informatics, it comes down to a really good set of requirements. So every small project you do, or every large project, really look closely at the requirements and then challenge those by prioritizing them for what you really need versus what you've already got. So if you've got a system that will support that set of requirements, then use the existing system. If you've not, then again, you better look at getting another system rather than doing the whole square pegs and round hole syndrome, which we often see. So back to data decoupling, if you're going to have as few systems as sensible, then yes, you're going to have to interface them. And you know, the things that Scitara and others are doing is very sensible in trying to make that layer, you know, not just, you could obviously go from one system to another as well. And every time you do that, you could probably do it natively in the products that you're trying to connect. You could then go to something, a generic sort of middleware piece, and that has its benefits. And then you can go to a scientific piece of software that understands the science as well as doing the middleware. So yeah, I think data decoupling makes sense, but just be careful that you're driving that platform for the right reasons.
Fine. So back to you, Dave, then. So how do Geoff's thoughts on as few systems as is sensible fit in with the Scitara view of the modern informatics environment?
Thanks, Rizwan and Geoff. Interesting commentary. I think I agree with you. And I think that there are two different things at play here that complement each other. Fully agree that any company should try to minimize the number of different informatics systems in particular that they have, just from a pure administrative burden point of view. That makes absolute sense. It's the right thing to do under any circumstances. I would suggest that digital decoupling, if you think about, you know, digital transformation is a big word. There's a lot going on there.
Sure.
The laboratory connectivity piece of it is an important component to the broader digital transformation picture. I would suggest to Geoff, yourself, and to our audience that unless you have a digital decoupled strategy, it is extremely challenging to achieve true digital transformation. You have to find a way to make it to be able to choose the right solutions for your lab and change them if you need to, without having to completely undo all of the integration work that you've done, and the ability to integrate or to connect different assets, instrument to instrument integration, instrument to informatics information, informatics to informatics systems, the variety of different types of communication and connectivity. It boggles the mind. And so if you really want to achieve that digital transformation strategy, you really need to find a way to get to that digital decoupled state. I think that it's a new word, if you will. It's really started to become interesting over the last few months. It is something that the Scitara digital data exchange platform supports, and we think that it's really kind of essential. But it complements, I think, Geoff's comments around minimizing the amount of systems that you have, because that really is something that should be in everybody's mind. And the more systems you've got, you could envision a scenario that even if you have a true digitally decoupled environment, if you're managing this very large array of different informatics systems, you're creating work for yourself. You might have the infrastructure that you need, but you're still creating more work than you really have to have. And so I think that there is room for both strategies in the modern laboratory today.
Right. Okay. And I mean, I might be way out in when I'm saying this, but does that mean that decoupling almost is like trying to give all of those different instruments and systems and ELNs a common language that they've all can sort of, so that you can sort of interpret all of them, if you like, with one common language, and therefore then have access to all of them at the same time and find that information you need across all of them?
It's a similar concept. It's really more of think of it as more of a translation layer, right? That we do perceive this digital decoupling concept as being able to establish an infrastructure, a digital data exchange infrastructure, where any system can exchange result information with any other system. A LIMS can make a request to a balance or to an HPLC. An eNotebook can make a request to an ammonia analyzer for data. That then the scientists do their thing in the laboratory, and when the data comes out the other end, that data can then be sent back to the requesting system. That could support file drops as well. You know, that you drop a file in a folder, you want that data to get parsed and reshaped, and it needs to go somewhere else. So the mechanism to transact and exchange those bits of information, potentially reshaping that data as it goes. So they don't all have to speak the same language necessarily, but there does need to be some sort of a translation capability. And, you know, that's the data exchange concept really has to include that, that ability.
Right. Okay. So, Geoff, you've got anything to add to what Dave just said?
Not a great deal. I'm going to say that data decoupling is, because I think you were struggling with it. I think it's difficult term in the way that we're talking about it, because we're actually talking about coupling everything up and joining. Well, maybe I should say joining everything up. What Dave's talking about is not having each system talking to the next one and the next one talking to the next. So then you're decoupling them. But yeah, the whole concept of having a platform that allows you to plug in different systems, it's been talked about a lot. There's a lot of interest in doing that, and a lot of companies trying to produce that sort of operation.
Right. And Dave, I'll give you the last word. So anything else to add there before we sort of sum up and start talking about where you can get more information?
Well, I would basically, first of all, thank you both, you know, for your time today and the great comments and the questions. I think that there is an interesting opportunity, and I agree with Geoff that we're at an interesting place right now. The combination of advances in technology, which continues to march forward, with the necessity of invention that COVID has produced, puts us in a very opportunistic space. I do believe very strongly that the technology is there to support digital data decoupling. And we're very much in the middle of that and very excited about it. And I think that we're learning as we go, and looking forward to continuing to work with our partners and customers to continue the digital transformation model.
Fantastic. So finally then, so Geoff, where can people get more information about the things you've talked about today and also about Scicon?
Yeah, so several places. So they can obviously join the chat in LinkedIn, because this is going out on LinkedIn. So I'll be following your posts. So if somebody wants to message me either directly in LinkedIn or put a message on the chat, on the comments, that would be great. Otherwise, go to scimcon.com. You can find out information there. You can contact us through that website, etc. So love to have a conversation with all of you.
Fantastic, Geoff. And same question to you, Dave.
So obviously on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find, obviously responding to this chat, as well as Scitara Corporation has its own LinkedIn page. I can be found on LinkedIn myself if anybody is interested. www.scitara.com, just to make sure, SCITARA.com. We've got quite a bit of information there, and you can always request more information through the website as well. So thanks again, and great talking to you both.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both for your time. It's a really interesting conversation. We could be talking for hours, literally, about this, because there's so many areas to talk about you can delve into when you start getting into this in a bit more depth. So thank you both very much for that information. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Viewers, I hope you found that interesting. It is a very hot topic. As you know, there's lots of events running at the moment about labs of the future, smart labs, and so on. So it's a very, very hot topic. So if you've got any questions for Geoff or Dave, feel free to leave them in the comments below the video. Check out the websites, which will be on above the video as well for more information. And obviously message Dave and Geoff directly if you've got any questions. So all that's left to say is, Geoff, Dave, thank you very much. Geoff, I hope you have a happy travels, and I hope the sun shines wherever you go. I hope Boston's sunny for you, Dave, as well, for the rest of the week and for the weekend.
I hope so too. Thank you.
And viewers, I hope you all have sun shining down wherever you are today and for the rest of the week as well. And thank you for watching. Until next time, as always, stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye now.